Good morning, everyone. I'm Kathy Leonard, president of Freeman Leonard. We are a marketing and advertising services firm providing staffing, search, and on-demand teams to both brand and agency clients. Thank you all for joining our webinar this morning. We are welcoming Christine Stebbins. Christine is part of our Game Changers program. These are executive level marketers who provide strategic marketing consulting. This morning, Christine is going to talk to us about this crazy year 2020 and what we as marketers can do to end it on a high note. And before I hand it off to Christine, I just want to let you know that if you click on your screen toward the bottom, you can pose a question. And at the end of her presentation, Christine will respond to as many questions as we can fit into the time available. So at this point, I want to turn it over to you, Christine.
Hey, thanks, Kathy. And good morning, everyone. I'm super excited to be here with you all today and talk about, how we can end 2020 on a high note as marketers. And I love the statement here to the left on the slide about, I want to thrive, not just survive. I don't want to just grit my teeth and try to make it through the year, but better yet, really find ways that we can end, 2020 with an upward curve and finding new and positive things that we can learn and take into 21 with us. So, over the past couple of weeks, I've been talking with a lot of different CMOs from healthcare, retail, financial services, et cetera. And, they all kind of are focusing on the same themes are coming to life around, hey, Christine, I need to sell things. I need to talk to my consumers. I need to figure out when and where and how I react and communicate with regards to my communities and what's happening from a social perspective within those communities. And there is obviously a lot going on. There's a lot of concerns that our customers have around their own personal health, around their economic livelihood, around the social issues in their neighborhoods and in their communities, and they all want to get back to work and also kind of balance that out, with the realities of what's happening from a pandemic. So from a marketing perspective, I think that we're definitely in unique days here in terms of how do we, navigate the waters and how do we determine the types of strategies that we want to put in place in order to keep our businesses healthy, keep our employees engaged, and ensure that we're connecting with our customers and our constituents in appropriate and relevant ways. And it does feel like sometimes as we've been going through it, that a wave is just crashing upon us, right? It's causing turbulence in our plans. And as marketers, we learn the strategies and the tools for creating marketing plans, sticking to the plan, learning from the plans. And I'm a planner. I love planning. I think it's a fantastic thing. But boy, if there was ever a time to find some ways to be a bit more flexible and adjust those plans, now is the moment. And what we're going to talk about today is we're going to look at some of the tools that we can use to help be a bit more flexible in our planning. And as we think about it, in normal times, we think about all the brands that we love to connect with. And Nordstrom is one of the brands that I love. I'm connected to the brand. I live in Seattle. Their headquarters is here. I also have worked with Nordstrom in the past as well. And in normal times, during the summer, we would see, and we are seeing, ads that come to us around our cute summer dresses or, clearance prices and things like that. And that's in normal times. But these are not normal times, as we know. And when I look at literally, I was physically driving down the road in downtown Seattle the other day, and I was juxtaposing the messages that I was receiving from Nordstrom around, hey, cute summer dresses are 60% off next to the store windows that are boarded up in downtown Seattle, and thinking about, what's literally happening on the streets right in front of the corporate headquarters, right in front of these beautiful stores. And it starts to cause cognitive dissonance for me and also for others. And I think that this is where, as marketers, we need to really understand literally what's happening with our customers. What kinds of messages are we sending? What kinds of media dollars are we spending? And where are we potentially causing cognitive dissonance with our customers? How do we find ways to avoid some of that dissonance that can make it just feel, just very confusing for us? It's like, I'm not really super concerned about a cute summer dress right now, quite frankly, when I have stores that are boarded up on the streets where I live. So there is this very interesting balancing act that I think we need to take into account. And God knows I love Nordstrom as a brand, but I do think that it's not just a Nordstrom issue. It's like all of the brands that we have out in market today, really need to be thinking through what is happening contextually, and therefore then what kinds of messages do we have that are appropriate in market. And therefore then, one of the key things that I think we all need to embrace is this notion of we need to keep our marketing plans agile in the face of uncertainty. And agile marketing is a tricky business. It means that we have to change things, we have to review things, we have to be prepared to know if we're going to react, are we going to transact, are we going to interact, what are we going to do, and how are we going to put our communications out into market. So this concept of embracing the notion of agility in the face of uncertainty is definitely something that I would recommend we all understand contextually, and then determine, as we look at where we're at today in the midpoint of 2020, coming down on, the beginning of July, going through the end of December, what are going to be some of the other interesting dynamics that we're going to face through the rest of this year, and where and how can we infuse agility into our planning process to allow us to, strive to end, 2020 on a high note. And one of the tools that I think is really important, and I've talked with a lot of senior marketers about this, as well as some of the CMOs I was referencing earlier, this is a skill that we have to build as marketers. It's, around agile scenario planning. How do we think about the what ifs? Oftentimes, we'll create our marketing back in normal days. We create our marketing plan at the beginning of the year. We understand what our spend is. We know what our resources are. For the most part, there might be ups and downs and we need to adjust, but we set our plan. We dig in, we start tracking it. We make adjustments either on a quarterly basis, or as we're going through key milestones from a seasonality perspective. And that's great. But in today's world, we need to have a more flexible and agile set of skills to plan for the what ifs and adapting to new realities. Right now, obviously, in certain areas of the country, we're seeing an increase in COVID cases as an example, which can immediately impact those businesses right down at the street level in terms of what do they say, what do they do, what do they offer, how are they going to support their customers. So this concept on this third point here of adapting to new realities, we do need to think about how do we do that? How do we have a flexible enough skill set and apply some of these agility practices so that we can adapt in very quick turn in short order if needed. And the first thing I would ask you is, first and foremost, are you taking a BAU, a business as usual approach? If you are taking a business as usual approach right now today, I would ask that you take a beat maybe over the next couple of days and reevaluate if that's working for you. Business as usual in the climate of today, and certainly for the rest of 2020, is not an approach that I would recommend. It's definitely one that I've talked with many CMOs and senior marketing professionals about, hey, my teams continue to want to default to a business as usual. I need to help them find new ways to think about solving these problems, because it's not just the challenges. I think the other part of this, interesting time that we're in is it can create, net new opportunities. And if we have a more agile thinking process around how we think about our marketing, our messaging, and our media, we can find new ways to create opportunities. I think one of the great examples of this, and this is from a distillery that's here in Seattle as well, very early on during the COVID situation, the distillery couldn't couldn't allow people. They have a tasting room. Their businesses, people come in, they taste, you know, their product, they buy it, and then they walk out. Obviously, that all stopped. And in the light of the need for, you know, hand sanitizer and creation of sanitizing products, you know, they started to create new opportunities for themselves. And now, not only are they creating the hand sanitizer, initially they were giving it away to people. They're now and have been started to sell these sanitizing products to hospitals, you know, and at enterprise level. In the beginning of 2020, if you had told them they were going to flip a switch and become a sanitation company, a hand sanitizer company by April 1st, they probably would have thought we were all crazy. But they did it. And part of the reason is, yes, they needed to do it out of just the market dynamics were, you know, instigating that change. But at the same time, they took a very agile approach. They took a step back. What do we have? You know, what kind of talent do we have here? What's the need? How do we address that market need? And how can we fill that? So that is an awesome example, I think, of applying that agile thinking, both to the product, the pricing, the promotion, the place, et cetera, to their particular scenario. But it can feel often, you know, like we are walking a bit of a tightrope, because I very well recognize that there are so many short-term and immediate situations that people need to address. You know, if there's immediate customer concerns where I have to communicate with them about how I'm going to keep my customers safe, how I'm going to keep potentially their money safe in banks, how I'm going to keep my patients safe when they come into my clinic. There's very immediate communication needs that need to happen, but also longer term planning strategies as we think about, you know, 6 to 12 months out. So I totally recognize and think through and often kind of ponder this balancing act that we're in. In addition, you know, the weighting of resources, I think one of the things that can really help is thinking about, you know, either parsing out the hours of the day or the resources that are on your teams around, do we have a part of our team think about the immediate and another part of our team is carved out to think about long-term? Because we don't want to do is wake up at the end of, you know, December of 2020, having spent, you know, the year really in a full-blown reactionary mode. And we, you know, we find ourselves now in a situation where we don't really have a plan for 21. So it is, you know, a really interesting balancing act of both our resourcing, our dollars, how we're spending our money, CapEx, OpEx, et cetera, and then really striking that balance to the best that we can. The good news is, you know, we're going into the beginning of July. We do have some runway between now and the end of the year. So there are some strategies we can use to strike that balance now before we find ourselves in the full-on throes of Q4. You know, and I think the other thing here that's a kind of an interesting model for you to consider as well is, how do you decide when to, you know, react, interact, and transact? And what I mean by that is, you know, when do you find yourself in situations either in your geography, in your industry, with your particular customer segments, your local markets, when you are going to react to something? Something's happened and you from a company and you as a marketing leader need to make a recommendation that the company needs to react to this. Or, you know, on the other hand, when do you find the need to interact? When do you need to actually have a true interaction with your customers? Now, depending upon what industry you're in, what business model you have, you know, that may already be somewhat predetermined and set. What I would question is maybe taking a step back and saying, you know, are we driving the right types of interactions that are truly relevant in the context of everything that's happening today? And then the last part is transact. You know, many of us are in the situation where we're like, we need to sell product. We've got revenue goals just like everybody else, you know, and quite frankly, you know, if you're in a demand gen business or an e-commerce business, you know, I'm sure your executives and the business as a whole is saying, look, we've got transactions we need to drive. We need to sell product, or, you know, we're going to have other kinds of problems as we exit 2020. So it is this interesting, combination of thinking about when do we react, interact, and transact. And, you could use your lucky 8 ball to try to help you find those answers. Sometimes, I just pull it off my desk and see if it's got any good, good thoughts for me. But, I do think a couple of the tools we have in here will help you start to set some context around that. So top 10 list for successful 2020. Some of these are obvious. Some of them are like, of course, we need to do that, but you might not be doing it. So the first and most important, I believe, it's 1 and 10, quite frankly, is this combination of, what's happening inside of your organization, and your employees are struggling with issues just like everybody else. We all are, dealing with different types of issues, whether we're in our home or in our office, et cetera. There's a lot of things that we all need to balance out. And therefore, then it's even more important than ever that in our marketing practices, when we're creating our marketing strategies and our marketing plans, I believe we need to practice empathy. We need to truly understand what are our customers and our constituents and our audiences dealing with, what is their mindset, and then as we're looking to communicate and connect with them, are we doing it in such a way that's truly going to be relevant based off of where they're at, what their struggles are? Or are we taking a tone deaf attitude? And the tone deaf approach is going to be just that. It's going to end up falling pretty flat in the context of what's happening in the situation for 2020 right now. So practicing empathy has never been more important. And then the other, 2 and 3 is really like, do you really have a handle on what your current messages are? As I've been talking with a lot of folks in preparation for this, they're like, well, we set our plans back in like March and we kind of let them roll. We had our media and our media spends were already done. Our messaging was already set. And I've seen about, kind of a mix between some companies that were like, yep, we set our messaging, our media, and we just kind of left it. And then, maybe the other 50% are like, no, we've either canceled all of our media, we've completely changed all of our messaging, we've created, we've had to gone through processes for creating new creative. So it's really kind of balanced. And again, given where we're at in this moment, as we think about this starting point in July through the end of December, the question for you is, do you know what your messages are? Are they mapped out appropriately? Do you know where your spend is? Is it in the right areas? And thinking through, what could you stop doing? What should you start doing? And what kind of adjustments and dials do you think you need to address, especially as we go from July run up to November, given the fact that we're in a political season. And then of course we have our Q4, it's anybody's guess at this point what our holiday window is going to look like. But nonetheless, it is important that we, kind of map out and have some of those scenarios. May not just be one plan, it could be 3 or 4 different options based off of our current situation. And then, 4 and 5 kind of go together here in terms of when we think about our messaging and we get it out into market, the test and learn strategy has never been more important. If you don't have a test and learn strategy today, this is a great time to get one. To think through, what kind of messages are out there in market, what kind of responses are we seeing, how can we take those learnings and feed them back into our longer term plan for 2020. And again, my favorite word of the day, is really having that agility to adapt and adjust. Even though you might not think it's the right message, it may be the one that's actually resonating with your customers, and you need to be open to that. And, the number 5, don't dig your heels in, is one sometimes I put in there as a reminder for me, because I too, I'm like, hey, we've done the research. We know what our strategy is. We need to get in, we need to invest, we need to we need to really reap the rewards of that and the return over that over time. But in today's situation, digging our heels in and saying, nope, we're going to hold steady no matter what, I think is a highly questionable approach, and one that we all need to just kind of let go of in the face of what's happening in 2020, and be more open to really rethinking, are the strategies that we put in place the right ones? that, 7 and 8 are kind of this notion of data. There's qualitative feelings, there's things that we feel about what we're doing or things that we think our customers are thinking. But we want to root that as much as possible to whatever degree you can in your situation. Everybody has varying degrees of, maturity around data and analytics associated with marketing. But if you don't have data, you need to get some. And if you don't have the ability to have a pulse and a track on what your customers are thinking, feeling, and doing right now, we need to double down quickly and figure that out, especially as we think about outlining the strategy for the rest of 2020. And then, the last is the set it and forget it. We talked about that earlier. This is not a time to just say, let's just run it as usual. And honestly, I think Nordstrom, to the point that I made earlier, they've got their marketing automation tools a little bit on set it and forget it. When we're getting messages about summer dresses and 60% off sales, which are great things, but we have no context here around what's happening from a social or an economic perspective at all, and zero messaging at that level. That's where we need to start thinking through what's the right balance that's going to make sense. And then lastly, stay close to your customers, which is always important, but has never been more important than today. Because as I think about this, we have this concept of the before. Before, marketers, we could all kind of get away with just doing our messaging and create it from an inside out perspective. We think we know our customers pretty well. We think we know what's really important to them. We know what our customers are going to do, whether it's based off of, trend data that we've seen in the past. Maybe we've actually gone through and created personas. Maybe we really do have the data to help inform that. But, as marketers, it's kind of our job to ensure and reassure the rest of our organization that, yeah, we got a handle on this. We know what's going on. But if we're only working in an inside out view today in 2020, that's a failed approach. I would say if you take nothing away from this other than this point, you must take an outside in view in terms of what are your customers, whether it's in B2B or B2C, what are your customers' needs, wants, and goals, and what do they expect from you? Because they do expect things from you. You may not know that, but they do, because expectations are increasing across the board in terms of what are you going to do for me for financial services? Are you going to, do loan forgiveness? Are you going to protect my money? Are you going to, if I'm on the B2B side, can I guarantee that you're going to be there? Are you going to be a reliable part of my supply chain? What's happening? Maybe, maybe not. Like I can't, customers / people are questioning what they can and what they cannot count on, given the situation that we're in. So what I would say is if you don't know what your customers' needs, wants, and goals are and what they actually expect from you and your company, you need to find out quickly. And that will allow you to take that insight and inform, quite frankly, what you do for the rest of 2020. So a couple of data points to consider, and this was some research that was recently conducted by RightPoint that I thought was very important and contextually aligned with what we're talking about. There are a lot of macro trends, and you guys see a lot of this data. It comes into your email box as well as it does mine. I think, the notion of work and home life have blurred. I'm doing work, I'm in my kitchen, so is everybody else that I know for the most part. Some folks are going back into the office, that's awesome. But these lines have blurred forever. It's not just a blip, it's not a moment in time. The role of physical spaces has changed dramatically. There's a concept of the 6-foot economy. What does that mean? For things like the Instacart business that has now, blown up overnight. This 6-foot economy is going to be so ingrained in our brains by the time we're all through this. It's not something that's going to just change overnight. And you can see it playing out in the news with this resistance to change. And I get it. I don't like to change either. Like, I like my things the way I like it. However, We don't have the luxury of that, given a lot of the different impacts that we're dealing with. So physical spaces have definitely become more critically important, and that's not something that changes overnight, but it's something you might want to be planning for as you think about 21, for any of your brick and mortar, any of your physical spaces, even physical business events. What are those really going to look like as we get into 21 and 22? The third point here, control. Control has become a extraordinarily high consumer priority. There are so many things going on around us all that we feel out of control. We want to find those things that we can control. And that's important to you as marketers, because you want to identify where can you put your customers in the front seat and allow them to have control, maybe over their preferences of how you communicate with them, maybe over options for the types of products or services you offer them. Those are some of the examples, but as you think about planning and agility planning for 2020, how can you find ways to help put your customers in the front seat of control? And virtual connections, obviously, part of everyday life. So those are a couple of points to consider that I think will help inform the strategies we think about for the rest of 2020. And the other thing is, I know I feel it, I'm sure you do too. People are stressed out. And when I saw this data, and there's a lot more information behind this, but the stressors for younger folks, 18 to 24, 87.5% are feeling very stressed out at this point. And this is on the very category. 25 to 34, 69, 35 to 44. So as you see, everyone across all of the different age groups here are feeling stressed. What really struck me here is as you get younger, you're starting to feel increased stress. So I think that that's important, because this is not, again, just a moment in time. These are framing moments that are going to be impacting these populations over very long periods of time, much like post 9/11 situations had, and impacts on people's behaviors, on their decision patterns, how they work, how they live, how they choose brands, how they buy product, etc. So I wanted to put this out there too, because I thought it was interesting and relevant given what we're talking about. So one of the first things, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, and some of the tools and tricks that we can use, if you will, as marketers. The first is auditing. Let's audit what you're saying. And think through, from your perspective, is what you're saying, is it relevant to your customers, or is it tone deaf? Have you or have you not acknowledged either challenges that your business is having, or that your employees might be having, or that your geography might be having, or that your industry might be having? Just again, putting our fingers in our ears and saying, no, everything's just hunky-dory and we're just going to keep on keeping on with our same messaging can really come across as tone deaf, irrelevant, something like, what, you just don't get it either as a company or as a brand. So therefore then I'm going to tune you out, or I'm just going to choose to not engage with you. So first thing is, let's do the audit. Let's understand, is what you put out market relevant, or is it acting tone deaf? Does it address your customers' needs, wants, goals? Whether it's around healthcare, education, the economy, social, business concerns. If you're in the B2B side, there could be concerns around the access to capital, access to resources, the ability to keep, your employee populations engaged and healthy. Or does it tie into some of those longer term and shorter term goals of your customers, whether it be on the B2B or B2C side? So starting to frame this out and actually mapping them, creating a map for that can be very helpful to determine where you might identify either gaps or, places where you could be over indexing and completely ignoring other critical areas that your customers are interested in. And then lastly, really take a context. So when you think about the brands and how brands are acting, reacting, and interacting in society right now, it's a great time to just take a beat and do a quick brand pulse to say, how are you showing up to your customers, partners, and suppliers? and doing a quick 360. It doesn't have to be arduous. It doesn't have to take months and months, but it can really help us to drop some of our preconceptions of how we think we're showing up, to better understand how are we really showing up, and going through some process to do that. And then the other thing is, map it out. So this provides like a little worksheet, if you will, that where you can start to map out and figure out where your gaps are. So if we go back to the earlier Nordstrom example, we know that Nordstrom's doing, awareness where they're trying to connect and drive transactions. So we've got check boxes there. Consideration of products, and they are, tracking customers' behavior. So they are doing, kind of providing that reaction. They'll react to what we're showing interest in. They start to get to interact if we're showing interest, and definitely, in the transact area if we're indicating behaviors around transaction. But on the community side, are they looking to connect with the community? Absent. Interact with the community? Absent. React to what's happening with the community? Absent. Or being proactive. Now, this is one person's view. If they are doing things, it's not coming across to me. I'm one of their most loyal customers. So it's just interesting, within this context to think about where are you in your messaging on this kind of a map. Where do you guys fall? It's like you can put your X's and your checks and figure out like what makes sense. And then you can overlay that with what do your customers and your constituents and your partners and suppliers want and need from you. And then you can start to figure out, get a better sense of, a heat map, if you will, around where and how you might need to address some of your communications. And I think, there's a great example that's been developing before our eyes as it relates to, the situation that's been going on with NASCAR. There were things obviously going on, where NASCAR reacted. They put out messaging, they took a stance as it relates to the Confederate flag that has been connected to their brand. They're trying to really take control of how their brand as NASCAR is reflected. Then there's reaction behind different activities that have happened with Bubba. And then we know the latest thing going on in the garage situation. So all of this is, the great thing about this scenario is that NASCAR has not been silent. They have not been absent. They have not allowed their brand to just be co-opted. They have taken a stance and they have taken action. And this story, is continuing to evolve. Is it going to impact their paid media? Possibly. It's definitely impacting their social. It's definitely impacting what they're doing in the community. So I think that this is a really interesting real life, real time example, if you will, but it also is showing, a brand that is walking their talk. They literally are out there on the road walking the talk that they believe around the context of how they want to have NASCAR construed in the market. So I think this is a very interesting and dynamic example of, what we're talking about here in terms of mapping and understanding, what makes sense and how you want to skew that messaging or map it or address it. And when do you do those things? So the other thing is, you can also take and overlay the percentages that I've added on here are really overlaying percentages of your media spend against, these different buckets, if you will, because there's the qualitative, which is what the messaging is, and then the quantitative of how are we actually spending our dollars. So in this case, I did a little bit of analysis with regards to, how different entities are mapping, 50% against transaction if they're trying to drive a sale through demand gen, 20, 25, et cetera. But I thought it would be better if I actually tell you a little bit of a story. And this is a story with a client, Bank of Hawaii in Hawaii, specifically focused around addressing the financial impact of COVID-19 in their markets. So back in the day, and again, back prior to the COVID situation happening, their messaging was very much focused, and paid and social was very focused on, we want to get new deposits, we want to drive acquisition, we want to get new business clients, we want to get loans, we want to get mortgages, as you would expect from financial services entity. What happened as the COVID situation started to unfold, Hawaii has the highest unemployment in the country as a result of COVID-19. They shifted all of their messaging from where they were on driving the demand gen to 100% community-centered reassurance around weathering the storm. 100% of all their spend, which is not insignificant in this market, because they realize that their role in the market is to ensure their community and really the whole state of the financial solidarity that they have to keep Hawaii financially stable during a very unstable time economically and also from a healthcare perspective. So that was a very dramatic shift. They made, it seems like obvious, oh yeah, of course they should have done that. But I mean, that's no small feat to make that decision, create new ads, get them out there, and they did it at all levels, and TV, radio, all the way down to the social impact as well. And what I think is interesting here from a social perspective is, again, previously, they had about 75% of their budget focused on demand gen, with maybe 25 on community-centered activities. And as they've gone through the past few months, they've completely flipped that balance. So, from my perspective, this is one example of where, there are pendulums. You could swing from 100% all demand gen to 100% all community. Some of it, it could be 25% community. Maybe in other cases, you just literally stop advertising altogether until you have appropriate creative, because messages matter. So, this is one example I wanted to share just to give context of how marketers need to think about, this shift in both messages and spend and focus based off of who they are, what communities they're in, what the communities are dealing with, what their constituents want and need to hear from them. So the other thing, couple things I'm going to wrap up here on is really talking about, this is some research done by the International Advertising Bureau, specifically around production and some production agility, because it costs money, as we all know, to create media, to create all of our different ad units, et cetera. It takes time and it takes money, and it doesn't happen overnight. And some of that, most likely you did not plan for additional creative, creation, if you will, and recreating, new ads or new creative assets on a constant basis. So a couple of things, to point out here is that when we look at social, paid search, digital audio, digital video, those are easier and faster ad production. So think about the mix of the units that you're using. I mean, I know it sounds obvious, but it does allow us a bit more flexibility and a higher degree of targeting as we think about, our future plans through the end of 2020. Also, the research is showing that buyers, 73% of buyers are planning to modify or create new ads. I know it sounds obvious, but again, set it and forget it. Same old messages we had from before, not going to work. Even now, when we see ads with big crowds of people, or I just saw an ad this morning that was for, I think, allergy medicine with, a bus that was jam-packed full of people. It's like, that doesn't, I don't relate to that. Like that, we could say, oh, that's pre-COVID. And yeah, you get away with that for a while, but after a time, it's like, you need to be contextually relevant. And I know it costs money and it takes time, but we really need to think that through. And in addition to the point that I was making earlier, messaging strategy changes by type in terms of, messaging continued to migrate to mission and cause related activities dramatically on the increase. So that is something, again, it sounds obvious, but if you haven't taken that into account, if it's not part of your mix today, it might be something, especially as we think about, the rest of 2020, that you do consider, and then think through some of those more flexible ad unit types that you can affect change with. So, this is a little bit of a model, if you will, in terms of some ways to think about, some considerations that I would put out there in terms of, looking at the media spend. If you're looking at awareness, you can look at the balance of, if you were at 50% awareness, maybe you want to dial that back. Maybe you want to dial back on awareness and dial back on demand. Maybe you dial up on community and social messaging. And also dial up on your digital channels if you haven't already. Invest in new creative for the rest of 2020. I would suggest you plan for or think about, the impact of getting new creative out there in market, and keep it in those more flexible channels, understanding it can be anywhere from 10 to 20% of whatever your budget is. You're going to need some new messaging. And then also think through that boost up through social amplification. If you don't have a social strategy, now is a great time to map one out and do some of that test and learn from a social perspective, especially in preparation for Q4 of 2020. So a couple of things to think about here is, you may need to increase your media spend to balance out that messaging. It may be unplanned. And I know it's difficult in some cases to make a business case for unplanned media spend, but I think as advocates, we need to take it back to our teams and to our executives about the importance of it. You will most likely need to increase your creative and production spend. You definitely want to watch your spend closely, especially around key events. And obviously some of the key events coming up include the conventions that are going to happen. Clearly the election spend, we're in an election year, that's going to increase cost as well. And that's the point that I called out here. And then obviously, going back to what we were talking about in terms of relevancy and trying to be as efficient as possible within context. So a couple things as well, there's a couple of other tools here where we think about, how do we break down these goals? How are we going to keep focused on, ending 2020 on a high note? And the first is, this is kind of a placemat tool that you can use, but you can map out, your goals, your customers' needs, wants, and goals, employees, your partners, and suppliers. And then start to document out, even at a high level, what your goals are. And they're probably very different now than they were at the beginning of January. So it's always a good moment in time to reflect and update those goals, and then break it down by month. I know it sounds obvious, but if you start to say, okay, in July, I think we're going to be able to do these 2 or 3 things. Maybe it's just one, for a goal, but what impact is that going to have on our customers, on our employees, and our partners and our suppliers? And then break it down to actions, the outcomes, and then ultimately the learnings that we can gain from the activities that we do in July. And then we can apply it across, the rest of the months we have. So start to stagger out that planning. And there are ways you can do this in an accelerated fashion. There's a couple of workshops that we run to help people kind of think about the messaging and the percentages that we just broke out, the placemat for planning, and then also the implications for creative creation, messaging, and then the media mix and the balance there. So don't overcommit, stay flexible and agile. I know I have to remind myself of this every day as well, because I tend to double down. But as we think about the rest of 2020, we really want to end it on a high note. We do have amazing potential to really get creative and think in brand new ways, perhaps, than we ever have. So embrace that opportunity is one of the things that I would say. And one of the ways to do that is, we do a mid-year checkpoint workshop, and we called it our high note planning workshop. So we can work with you to do a quick message map, get some skills so we can walk in the shoes of your customers and really understand what's going on. Maybe update those personas if you haven't already. Maybe do a quick pulse study to get some insights and listen in on what your customers are saying, thinking, feeling. Do that quick analysis on the media spend, and then use some of those tools that we've outlined for scenario planning for the next 6 months, so that you can walk out of this workshop, with a plan towards, really continuing to try to move the bar forward for the business as we as we exit 2020. So with that, I'm going to take, I've got lots of questions here, so I'm going to take a few of these. We'll start with one from Brian, it looks like. How do you ensure your clients balance their established brand positioning with a high quantity of agile projects and responsive communications? So I think within that, that's a really good question, Brian. And one of the things is, when we think about agile planning, of course, if you have an established brand, there are going to be brand pillars and brand attributes that we're going to want to honor and live within. So if we can identify what those brand, and if you don't already, if it's an established brand, you most likely have those brand pillars defined. One of the things we can do is we can piggyback off of those against more agile type efforts that are connected to those pillars that are perhaps things you have not tried before. So for example, if one of your brand pillars is around safety, and you want to ensure that, you know, safety in everything you do is connected to what you deliver to your customers, there can be micro brainstorming sessions just around, well, what does safety mean? What are new ways to deliver safety in this moment that are going to connect back to the brand pillar, but also be relevant to what your customers' needs, wants, and goals are. So it's kind of a pivot between connecting the brand pillar in with your customers' inputs and figuring out how can you action agile planning within that and make it responsive back to your customers. So that's one way to do that. I think the other way is, especially if you have a framework for the brand, if you haven't already, you can embrace more social mechanisms as well as interaction methods where you can try to incite feedback from your customers in a more rapid fashion, so you can basically co-create with your customers. Some brands are very uncomfortable doing that, and I understand that. But at the same time, I think now is a time where we want to identify those ways we can put our customers in as much control as possible, just given the situations that we're all dealing with. And I think that that's going to pay dividends. Another question we have here is, how do you help executives understand our strategies in light of what's happening when they're pressuring us to drive sales messaging? So this is one that I was talking a lot with folks about lately, in terms of, you know, hey, we want to talk with the community. We want to get community messaging out there, but our executives are concerned. There's fear associated with that. We don't know if we're going to get a backlash. So they just want us to, you know, pump out our promos and our sales messaging. And I would say to them, I would do my best to help them hear from your customers about what is truly relevant to them, and help everyone understand that when we get on the other side of 2020, we want to have our brand and our company stronger than it was at the beginning of 2020. And one of the ways we're going to do that is if we have strong and deep connections with our customer base, that we have loyalty, and that we have trust. And one of the ways we're going to gain that trust is through the relevancy of our messaging. So if we continue to be tone deaf, if we continue just not to recognize what's happening around us, we need to help those executives understand that our customers will tone us out, and we will pay the price for that over the long term. It will happen. It's not an easy conversation to have. But you know, it is one that I think is worthy and necessary for executives to hear, especially when I feel the marketers' pressure around, you know, I've got all the pressure down on me. My execs want me to just push sales, and I'm trying to balance this out with doing what's right for my customers. Let's see. Another question is, you know, what are some fast and quick ways to gain customer insights and get closer to our customers? You know, there's a lot of ways to do this that may not feel as natural to all the marketers on the phone as they could be. One of which is, for instance, if you have a call center, listen in on the calls. You're going to hear a lot about what your customers are thinking and feeling, depending upon what your business is. If you have the ability to go out and talk directly to your customers, even if it's not through a call center, do that. Call them up, talk to them, see what's on their mind, see what's going on with them. The other way is if you have larger, if you're like a B2C business and you have a larger customer base, you can do quick pulse studies. You can do quick surveys. And these things, again, do not have to be, 6-month extravaganzas. You can now get a good pulse read within 7 business days on your customers' needs, wants, goals, intents, and current perspective on your brand. There are very quick and easy ways these days to gain those insights. And I would suggest that everyone on the phone consider, how are you going to do that right now? And maybe have that set up with a regular pulse through the rest of 2020. Because back in the day, doing our annual brand tracker, or maybe even a more quarterly readout, quarter by quarter, the world's literally turning upside down every, 72 hours. So we need to find, as marketers, more rapid response ways to gain insights from our customers. The other thing we can do is we can really stay on top of our analytics, whether it be on our website, whether it's through our chat bots that are on our websites, et cetera. There are a lot of different ways to gain that feedback. So I would consider those as some of the methods to stay on top and get closer to our customers. Let's see. So Heidi had a question about, we give 20% of our profits to charity, but we don't really advertise this fact. Any tips around communicating that without sounding self-serving? Yeah, I would say some of the tips are based off of what you give to charity. If those charities are focused on the core pillars of what your company's beliefs are, you should let people know that, because it does send signals around the belief system of the company, and that you're kind of walking your talk. It's not so much like, hey, look at us, how great we are, we're giving all this money. But it's more around, we see a need in the community, in whatever community we're part of. We're part of this community. We need to play an active role. We feel responsible for the ways in which we support the community to be a responsible member of this community. And this is what we're doing in order to make that happen. So I do think that there are ways to make that come to life. And even if it's not just the money, like just the profits, but if your employees are active in the community and part of the community that you're serving, that allows us to humanize, our business entities, and put a human face on, what these companies are doing. And that's a good thing. So I do think that there are ways to do it without sounding self-serving, that really allow us to kind of balance that out. Let's see, another question is, well, how do we keep this flexible media mix? We talked about, buys have to be done, ahead of time, and there's bids that are in and bids are changing constantly. How do we keep a flexible media mix? I think one of the things, is definitely, really delving into the expertise needed, especially around our digital media and our highly targeted media. We all know that, the media world has dramatically shifted. There's so many very creative and interesting ways to reach our different target segments through digital in particular. So if you don't have, a solid digital media plan per se, I would get one very, very quickly, because it does allow you to do things like turn off, turn on, look at the searches, look at the ways that the populations are moving and mixing in different media types and how they're engaging with media types, et cetera. It does allow you to have more flexibility. It also allows you to do more in the test and learn arena as well. So that's one of the things. And then where you do have buys, let's say if it is TV, radio, and some of these other ongoing buy Think about contracts that are going to allow you to shift spends and turn off and on. And sometimes you might have fees associated with the turn on, turn off, and adjusting those buys. But those fees are going to be well worth it if you are finding that the messaging you have in market is just tone deaf. Then what's the point of spending the money in the first place? So take the hit on the fee to keep messages out of market that are not going to be supportive of, you know, what you're looking at and what you're looking to do. Let's see, I had another question here as well. Are there any other ones that you guys have in terms of questions? Oh wait, let me see. I've got one in the chat. Hold please. Oh, thank you. Well, thank you, Juliana, as well. All right, well, folks, I think that that's it. If you guys have any other questions, just let us know. We'd be happy to follow up and send you out more details. We will make this webinar available to you and to your teams. I have greatly appreciated pulling this together for you all today and talking about these topics. I hope that we can work with you all on a high note planning workshop and figure out how we can wrap up 2020 on a high note. And I hope all is well. Oh, wait, I might have one more question. Let me just check. Oh, thanks. Okay. All right. Well, with that, I will say thank you all, and I hope you all have a great day.